This week, the North Carolina State Board of Electors announced that more than 700,000 voters have been removed from the state's rolls in the last 20 months due to ineligibility. This follows a national push from the Republican National Committee and state committees to clean up voter rolls and strengthen election integrity efforts, with a particular focus on battleground states deemed critical to the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. Joining me now to discuss this is Hans von Spakovsky, manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative, the Heritage Foundation. He also served 2 years as a member of the Federal Election Commission, the authority charged with enforcing campaign finance laws for congressional and presidential elections. Hans, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So your thoughts on the latest developments out of North Carolina?
Well, I think this is great. In fact, election officials should be commended for doing actually what they're required to do under two separate federal statutes, which is maintain the accuracy of their voter rolls. That the 747,000 individuals they removed over the past year and a half are all folks who should not be on the rolls. According to the breakdown that they gave, they're people who have died, moved out of state, become convicted as felons and therefore losing their right to vote. In other words, all folks who are ineligible. In fact, a lot of them, apparently a fair number, were people who had two registrations in the state of North Carolina. And so what they did was remove one of the registrations. All of this is a good thing. Other states should all be following this example and doing exactly the same thing.
Well, Hans mentioned the number of 700,000 names that were removed.
Right.
Had this not been done, is this a situation where those, dead persons, their names would have been in the voter rolls, but somebody would have had to come into an election place and claim to be them? And so in reality, those names would have just lied there dormant, and though on the rolls, nobody would have voted in their name? Or is this a situation where ballots are being mailed out in these persons' names, and so people would be getting multiple ballots, or dead people would be receiving ballots?
Well, fortunately, North Carolina is not one of the states that has moved to mailing out ballots to every single voter. You may know that's what they now do in Nevada. Very, very bad practice. But when you have names on the rolls of individuals who, for example, have moved out of state, someone can try to go in and vote in their name or just request an absentee ballot. So it's a good thing to take those names off. Again, federal law requires that. And for folks who think this is a huge number, it's not. Consider the state has 7.7 million registered voters. So this is less than 10%. And remember, Americans have a very high mobility rate, right? Moving is a very big thing in America. Last time I looked, the numbers were over 10% of Americans, average mobility rate. So this sounds about right in terms of how many people they ought to be taking off the rolls who are no longer eligible.
Hans, when we see this number, is it fair to conclude that 4 years ago in 2020, there were 700,000 names on the voter rolls that shouldn't have been? And therefore, does removing these names have a likelihood of making a difference in the upcoming election?
Well, it could definitely make a difference. Consider the fact that in 2008, Barack Obama won the state of North Carolina by only 14,000 votes. That's a very small number. Think about Georgia in the 2020 election where Donald Trump lost by only a little over 10,000 votes. In an election, particularly a presidential election, and certainly in local elections, close elections, these kind of names being on the rolls, names that could be used by people who want to cheat, can make a difference. And it's not like North Carolina is an extremely clean record there. They've recently prosecuted aliens for registering and voting in the state. You may recall in 2018, the State Board of Elections overturned a congressional race because of widespread absentee ballot fraud. That's not that long ago.
All right. That's a really good point. And to that point about widespread absentee ballot fraud. You've been sounding the alarm on the potential for mail-in ballot fraud and kind of a chaos there. We have about a minute and a half left, but tell us what you're concerned about there and what should be done.
Well, if you check out the election fraud database that the Heritage Foundation maintains, you'll find that many of the cases involve absentee ballot fraud. Why? Well, because they're the only kind of ballots that are voted outside the supervision of election officials and outside the observation of poll watchers. States need to take steps to secure and increase the integrity of those. For example, Georgia extended its voter ID law, which used to only apply to in-person voting, to absentee ballots. Other states need to do exactly the same thing when they're handling and sending out absentee ballots.
Yeah. Well, we all understand, at least intuitively, that when you just mail out ballots to everybody who wants them, and then you see what we're seeing today with the potential of 700,000 names being on a voter roll that shouldn't be on a voter roll, it's not difficult to understand why that would be a problem. And therefore, it's not difficult to understand why we should prevent that from happening. Hans von Spakovsky, thanks so much for your time today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.